Thank you much, Sinclair. Marlo Anderson. I am with Zuvio Incorporated, and we're going to talk a little bit about, not that the company that I run has anything to do with autonomous vehicles, but we're going to be talking about that as well as some other technology. On the panel, we have Miss Metaverse Katie Aquino, we have Dr. Paul Gunderson, and Mr. Dave Blair, and I don't think anybody there is a stranger to anybody as well. So I'm going to go through a little bit about the future of transportation and probably scare you a little bit, and the people that are at the panel here have no clue what they're about ready to see or hear as well. I want them to, we want discussion that's going to go on over this panel, and of course we encourage your questions as well. So with that, of course, we just invited Dr. Gunderson up here, so he will not be part of these slides there. Thank you, by the way, Dr. Gunderson, for joining us. So, in the future, these are the challenges that we have facing our country when it comes to transportation. We will have a population boom, as you can see, coming at us. By the year 2045, we will have an additional 70 million people living in this country. So of course that's going to really tax our infrastructure a little bit. The other issue that we have, that we spend over 40 hours stuck in traffic every year right now. I'm just throwing some of the fun things that are going on. The cost of congestion annually right now, $121 billion a year. Our population is getting older. By 2045, the number of Americans over age 65 will increase by 77%. So you think about the baby boomers coming of age now, well, that trend continues as we move forward. Millennials are shaped by technology. You know, Miss Metaverse here the other night talked about the generational gap. That's what we're facing right now as well. There are people like you and I, well, not everybody in this room, but there's a few of us my age and older, that maybe haven't embraced technology like we should have, or you know, back up a little bit here, I guess. But that's always a thing for us. I mean, there's always that generational divide. It's just that it seems to be wider now. I mean, you think about the days 100 years ago when we were shifting from basically horse and buggy to the horseless carriage. It's hard to believe that's only 100 years ago when we look at what we have going on now. But there was a generational divide there as well. I mean, the older population didn't want to give up horses. It was a huge debate. It divided this country. And it took 20 years before we started seeing any semblance of roads and that type of thing, because it took that long for people to actually think about the possibility of cars being better than horses. And of course, I don't think there's anybody in this room, maybe except for Steve, that would like to see horses back on the road, but that gives you an idea about what we have going on right now, because you know we have this generational divide. We have people that are coming of adult age that have no clue what anything other than a cell phone is. I mean, everybody in this room probably knows what a rotary phone is, party lines. By the way, I heard this morning that there are still 5,000 party lines in this country. So just to give you an idea, but that's probably another 2 years that'll be gone too. And I bet you most of those people have cell phones. That's probably why they don't give up their party lines, because it doesn't matter to them anymore. Income equality, 10% of the population takes home 1/3 of our national income, and that will continue to divide as well. And then that bottom map there, those are by 2045 what they consider what will be the new mega regions. And what's interesting, of course, the West Coast probably doesn't really surprise anybody. Texas, probably not a whole lot. Florida, not so much. But look what happens around that Chicago area into Minnesota. And then also look what happens right through the middle of the country. And those areas will continue to grow. I'm not sure if our region will, you know, maybe they're not reflecting that as well as they probably should, because I have a feeling our region is going to grow as well. All right, so next up. Well, I wish my eyesight was better so I could actually see that monitor there. So, don't laugh, Katie. By 2045, transportation and the economy The U.S. economy is forecast to grow by 115% to $36.7 trillion, and the transportation sector represent $1.6 trillion of that. So what is that, about 2% or so of the total gross domestic product will be transportation. Interesting, global demand for U.S. products, 1 billion in exports, 5,000 U.S. jobs. Trying to read all of it there. U.S. exports will reach 2.3 trillion in 2013. So this slide is a little bit old here, but it goes to show you that things are continuing to move upwards as far as exports go as well. The energy boom is placing unprecedented demand on our transportation system. I don't think there's anybody in this room that would disagree with that. Crude oil production is up 50% since 2008. Rail carried 400,000 carloads of crude oil in 2013. And again, that's, I'm sure, gone up dramatically since then as well. 2014 U.S. freight volume will grow to 29 billion tons, an increase of 45%. Again, really taxing the current infrastructure that we have. I'm just going to kind of move on from there. Transportation investment. So what I'm scaring you with here is that we're going to be moving more and more goods all the time. But what's scary about it is that we're not investing in our infrastructure, and that number will continue to decline. So 120 billion for highways and bridges between 2015 and 2020. The current annual spending at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, $83.1 billion. 43 billion for public transportation. Meanwhile, annual capital spending is just $17.1 billion. So you can see, and then on the bottom graph there, it shows, this is the big concern. Technology will continue to get better. Our modes of transportation are probably going to change. And how do we fund our roads? Because as our mileage gets better in our cars, of course that's the big goal, but we have gasoline taxes. So as that gasoline tax number declines, which it's doing right now, we actually consume less fuel now than we did 3 years ago in this country, and that mode they think will continue to go. So we have that challenge in front of us. And in fact, Oregon, that's on the right side there, they've gone to a test pilot program where they just charge $1.56 a mile. That includes the fuel cost. That's their tax and everything. So how many of you would like to pay $1.56 a mile when you're moving goods right now? One person. Wow. Victoria. That's expensive. I mean, if you were moving a car down the road and you were paying $1.56 a mile, you'd probably think twice about driving from Bismarck to Fargo if that cost you $300 to roll over there right now. So, but that's what we're talking about here. So they're experimenting with things simply because the base for the funding is disappearing. So how do we solve this? Well, there you go. I'm scaring you a little bit now, I guess. But, and that's probably how a lot of you feel when you take a look at this, is that you want to pull your hair out of your head because if you have any left, unlike me, that's what I do all the time. That's why, yeah, stop that, Larry. That's good. But there are ideas that are progressing that will address some of these issues, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is driverless or autonomous vehicles. And we think that there's a lot of momentum in this industry. You've heard a lot about it the last couple of days. And one of the things that autonomous vehicles will do is they are much more efficient on our roadways. You know, you don't have to worry so much about night travel. In fact, our autonomous vehicles can move goods 24/7 in the current infrastructure that we have now. So maybe we don't need as many roads in the future because of that. The safety concerns, and that's a huge deal, by the way. Imagine eliminating 9 of every 10 car crashes. 90% less fatalities because we have automated vehicles. That to me, that's the number one reason that I advocate this technology, is because of the safety concerns and the money that saves and the time that saves. I mean, everything rolls into that. And then of course, that same technology moves to our airports. How many of you have ever circled an airport or when you're landing for hours and hours on end because they don't have a place for you to land your plane? You know, it happens to us all the time. That's probably going to go away in the next couple of years because they'll become more efficient with that as well. They'll be able to time the planes when they're coming in and land them appropriately. So there's all kinds of cool things that are going to happen with that. So anyway, with that, let's send the microphone down to Dave, and we're just going to kind of discuss a little bit about autonomous vehicles and where we see this going in the future. Congratulations, Dave.
Put me on the spot, right? When me and Marlo were brainstorming here about a year and a half ago about, promoting this conference and doing something a little bit different, we came up with this idea of this autonomous friendly corridor connecting Canada to Mexico. And what does that mean? And what could it mean both for the Central North American Trade Corridor, but in general, of how we could position ourselves in creating this corridor, whether it's a transportation corridor, energy corridor, and we're not so hung up on Highway 83, and I want to make that really clear. But that was kind of the emphasis we put together in regards to how we wanted to utilize that north-south route from Canada down into Mexico, and it's the only highway that does connect all of our states going north and south, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. So then we said, well, let's start looking at, where the industry's at on the autonomous vehicles. And, we know what's going on with drones, but we wanted to really get a better idea of what's happening on the autonomous side of things. We really worked hard on trying to get a few of those vehicles up here for our demonstration on Monday. There was a little conflict because of a national show going on, but, I think that we all know that industry is moving in that direction. There's been so many articles about Google and what they've done with their autonomous vehicle. And then the trucking industry, Freightliner, what they're doing. Europe's way ahead of us in regards to that. But, I think, Marlo nailed it when he said, what is that autonomous vehicle going to do for us in the future? And we know that there's going to be a lot of savings when it comes to that. And I'm just going to quote on one thing that's really interesting, and that's on the insurance side of things. 90% of all the crashes are driver error, and it costs the insurance industry, which is us, around $30 billion for insurance. That's just in the United States. Considering that there are 16% of uninsured vehicles out there as well. But industry is saying that with these autonomous vehicles, they figure that they can cut the savings by 50%. And that's a huge number if you think about it. So I think yesterday about dreaming big and understanding where things are going to be at. I'm not sure how I feel about riding in an autonomous vehicle yet, where I tell the car to take me home. There's probably times when I was a lot younger that I wish I would have had a car like that. But I think it's here, it's coming. Whether it's 2 years or 5 years down the road, I think the freight side of things is going to be phenomenal of moving goods and having the opportunity not to strain our fleet of drivers, because that's becoming harder and harder too, those long haul drivers. So the trucking industry is looking at this very seriously as well. So I don't know, I hope that answers a little bit about what I see happening.
All right. Speaking not so much from the UAV industry itself, in part because I'm not General Palmer, although he and I collaborate often, particularly in Rotary meetings and that kind of thing. But speaking from the agricultural perspective, we already know that the movement towards the use of autonomous technology will make a huge difference on the liability side. Generally speaking, in terms of injury and disease, most of that occurs as a result of people being placed in hazardous work environments. Those work environments are what cost agriculturalists, production folks, a lot of money. And in fact, the number of firms across the nation who are willing to carry agricultural enterprises and cover them, particularly in terms of liability coverage, is decreasing across time. The result of that is to push the agricultural industry towards generating much safer workplaces in which humans can exist. That means autonomous technology. There's just really no other way of dealing with that whole environment. And it's everything from confined space on one end, whether it's a manure holding structure or a grain storage structure, all the way to what happens in open agricultural terrain on the other end. The day when agricultural producers will turn over a tractor and kill themselves or injure themselves is past. And anyone who does that today is clearly inflicting self-injury and self-death on themselves because the technology exists to prevent virtually all of that. So from the liability side, there are huge developments that are unfolding. Secondly, with respect to transport of agricultural produce, agricultural products are bulky, whether it's livestock, grain, lumber, because in many cases, even in a state like North Dakota, we have an emerging lumber industry along the river watersheds and river bottoms. When we transport those products, there's keen interest in ensuring that those products reach their market destination in the right condition. If we're transporting livestock, that's a particular concern. And in fact, since my farm is located almost adjacent to Highway 52, going from the far northwestern part of the state down all the way into the greater Fargo-Moorhead area, I will see on average something approaching 22 semis a day from Canada transporting hogs to slaughter. That product needs to arrive in Green Bay or in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or across the river into Iowa to the slaughter plants in good condition. Watered, dewatered, whatever. So the autonomous technology holds real promise because that will shorten the distance from farm to market appreciably, since except for fuel stops, there's nothing else that prevents that vehicle from remaining on the road continuously. So there are huge differences there. There are huge impacts there. The same holds true for perishable foods. You know, one of the major problems with the natural food and organic food movement is that by and large, the acreage has to be fairly close to a metropolitan area in order to make that business model work. And we know that because North Dakota has the largest contiguous organic acreage in the nation. It's right west of Jamestown. And it's a huge area. But the vast majority of what's being raised on that acreage is organic flax, organic wheat, products that are not perishable. But if you and I go in to our grocery store, what do we see up and down those lanes and those aisles? Primarily perishable food product. With autonomous transportation, road, surface transportation, we now face the prospect of potentially shortening that time from harvest to market in a most appreciable manner. And that will serve to move that business model, which can work, much further out from major metropolitan areas so that your slide, which depicted the mega cities of the future, all of a sudden becomes reachable for those of us who are not necessarily within 35 miles of that kind of an environment. The third implication that I see off of what I just heard this morning in the last few minutes, from an autonomous perspective is the potential for development of a brand new array of vehicles using the nation's airspace. Unmanned aerial systems per se don't have to be tiny. We know that from the military experience. And the UPSs of the future world, some of whom serve the agricultural industry, if I didn't have UPS, I'd be out of business in terms of parts arriving at my farm in time to permit me and our 2 renters to continue to function in a timely manner. Autonomous technology offers a significant advantage because now one doesn't worry any longer about hours that a pilot has flown or not flown in order to move aircraft and goods and services from one area of the nation to the other. You see, if I want parts for any one of the green tractors that I'm running at this point in time, the vast majority of those parts are coming out of the Quad Cities, Iowa and Illinois. By truck, that's hard to do overnight. Very hard to do. It's an 18-hour trip by truck to get either to Minot or to Harvey or even Jamestown. The autonomous promise will change all of that rather remarkably. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to our guest to my right.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I have kind of a different perspective on autonomous vehicles. I mean, of course, I do believe that there are a lot of great benefits for transportation. Of course, many of us know that autonomous cars will help save on fuel costs, especially when there are, a lot of trucks are riding together in a line. There's a lot of studies saying that by, having a lot of these trucks in a line traveling together, they're actually going to save a lot of money, and these trucks will be communicating with one another, just like the slide before that Marlo had. That's called the Inspiration Truck, and I spoke about the Inspiration Truck the other day during my keynote on the future of transportation. So one of the things about autonomous cars that I find really exciting is kind of like the 1929 Futurama exhibit that GE had. And it was all about, lifestyles of the future. We'll have cars that drive themselves. And it was really cool to see because if you watch the videos on YouTube that feature the Futurama exhibit, GE was really ahead of their time. They saw this vision of how we could be living. And their autonomous highway was that cars, right, were luxury living rooms that had wheels on them. Basically, a family could be playing cards together in the car as it's driving. And then another great thing was that it would automatically become autonomous as soon as it went on a highway. So that's kind of where we're starting off now with the autonomous cars, is that a lot of these autonomous cars are going to begin as semi-autonomous, taking over features such as assisted parking, and also taking over on the highway. So there's a lot of great things about autonomous cars that will be coming out. Another thing too is Volvo recently said that by 2019 they plan to have 100 fully autonomous vehicles in the hands of potential customers in Sweden. And they really want to prove, both Google and Volvo, many of these companies, they just want to prove that, with as few as 28 lasers, cameras, and radars and sensors, cameras and everything, the systems, that you can make a car fully autonomous and rely on it 100%. And it can only cost $5,000 to make a car fully autonomous. That's what we're looking at in the future. It's going to be low cost to do this, to convert any car to an autonomous vehicle. So I think the convergence of many of these different trends that are happening right now will be making life a lot easier. I think that cars will be a lot better. And also another thing too, software systems and computers are going to be just advancing like really very, very, very fast. Rapid acceleration of the computing power we'll be seeing. And another thing too is that supercomputers, right? The Watson supercomputer excited all of us when it first came out, right? I mean, it won Jeopardy. Everyone was excited about, what can a supercomputer do? Well, supercomputers are also going to be in our cars. And the car of the future will have a supercomputer the size of a car stereo, and that car inside your car, I mean, that computer inside your car can have more computing power than computers we have today. It's a supercomputer. It's going to be connected to everything. So I think what a car means to us, in our lives in the future will have a big, huge change. I think that we're going to be using cars to work as mobile offices. I think that we'll be using cars for a lot of different purposes, but I think the technology will be giving us a lot more than we have today, and there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to. So I'll turn it over to Marlo now.
So as you can see, 3 different people, 3 different visions, but I think everybody that's up here realizes that this is coming and is a positive change. I look at the infrastructure needs that we have in our country. Like I mentioned before, that I really think that this is going to improve that infrastructure. We're not going to be having to put as much money into roads simply because they're going to get utilized better. So you have to kind of look at that. Katie's analogy of I shouldn't say analogy, but you're talking about the price of changing a car to an autonomous vehicle. So I'll back up here just a little bit. Okay, so this car right here, this is the Delphi car. This is a car that actually just drove from, I think it was Los Angeles to New York in April. Many of you probably heard about this. This is actually the same car I rode in willy-nilly through Las Vegas a couple months ago. And, people are always interested. Yes, Michael, if you would have joined me this year, you could have rode in this car, as a matter of fact. So Michael Hofferth back there, by the way, he's been a frequent travel companion of mine to CES. So it's good to see you here, by the way, Michael. So this car, people are apprehensive maybe about jumping in an autonomous vehicle or that type of thing. I was too. The first time I got in a car, that was 2 years ago. It was a Mercedes car, and the doctor, the engineer of this vehicle, invited me to come down and take a ride in it, and they put me in the back seat. And I thought that was kind of unusual right away. There's no driver. In fact, they had to put a dummy in the driver's seat because people were like, "Hey, Martha!" And the people were actually driving into the car through the streets of Las Vegas because they were amazed that this thing was going down the road with no driver in it. So they put this dummy with a chauffeur's hat on there so people wouldn't be distracted by that. But got in the car asked me where I wanted to go. It asked me how I was doing. It was like, "Mr. Anderson, how are you doing today?" I thought there was a microphone in there and somebody was talking to me, but I was talking to the car, "Where'd you like to go?" And I said where I wanted to go, and it drove me there. So this technology is here now, but people are a little apprehensive about it. So what I've done here as we're going through the slides is that there's steps that the manufacturers of vehicles, and I know we talk a lot about cars, but think of it as vehicles. And we're talking about the ability to transport goods with this as well. Katie mentioned Volvo. They're also developing a semi-less trailer, I guess you could call it. There's no semi on the front of this. The motor is mounted underneath the trailer, and you program it, and it will drive. So it's a moving flatbed down our highways. So that's where we're moving with this. So these long-haul drivers, the Dr. Gunderson was referring to, the ability to move things quicker across our country, and that's going to be a reality. I mean, you simply put, if you need to move something from Texas to North Dakota, and what normally would take 3 days because of the laws and regulations that we have nowadays, a driver can legally drive, 8 or 9 hours at a time or whatever. That doesn't impact autonomous vehicles at all. You think about it, that these vehicles can be driving 24/7. Has a huge impact on how much we can move in our country. So I think that's a cool thing with autonomous vehicles. So we're going to be moving through some steps. So the first thing you see is V2V communication. Are you familiar with V2V, Kate? Okay, so I'm going to let her take over and explain what that is.
Right. So V2V, vehicle to vehicle, means the cars will be communicating with one another. And as I also discussed the other day, the Internet of Things, everything is going to be connected and speaking to one another. a lot of advancements with the autonomous cars, and one of the greatest benefits is, let's say if you're driving down the road and someone stops this big truck right in front of you and you have to stop, right? Naturally, we would think about trying to slam our foot on the brake and try to get out of the way of the car. But these cars are so advanced now that when, let's say something like this happens, the car will know which side would be better to go to safely get around this vehicle. So it's very advanced, and these cars do communicate with one another, and it's great. It's a lot of good things coming out of it. I think there's also a lot of other great ways that these type of systems will be able to benefit companies as well. I think that using an array of different sensors and being able to customize autonomous cars for transportation could help companies by knowing how much exact product is in there. You can actually customize your cars to whatever needs that you might have. I mean, depending on what industry you're having, I think that with this type of technology, we'll be able to do a lot more and have a greater hold on our cargo and our people and their drivers, and really be able to monitor at all times, where everything is at and how things are coming along. So it's definitely exciting.
Thank you, Katie. So B2B communication, that means what to everybody? And basically, cars will communicate with each other, just like what Katie was talking about. So when is this going to happen? When you buy your car in 2016, that car will have V2V communication built into it. So the industry has already taken a hold of this technology, and they're going to start using it. Another example I like to give is if somebody hits a deer a half a mile in front of you, you're traveling on the interstate at 75 miles an hour, and there's a car that's at a dead stop a half mile in front of you, your car will tell you that this has happened. There's a lot of things, or the semi or whatever that's traveling down the road. So there's a lot of things that will happen because of V2V communication. Yes.
I just want to add one more thing too about V2V. So there's an app called Waze. Have any of you heard of Waze before? We have Victoria in the back. She has her finger on the pulse of technology right there. Okay, so Waze is W-A-Z-E. It's an incredible, great app. What it does is it's crowdsourced. So basically, everyone, and there's so many people using it everywhere, all over the United States. So when you go to drive, it's a navigation app. So basically, instead of using, let's say, your iPhone's Maps or Google Maps, you can use Waze, W-A-Z-E, for navigating to where you have to go. So you type in your location, where you're going to go, it pulls it up. You can sign up for Waze using Facebook or your telephone number. And what's great about it is that you are part of this crowdsourced information superhighway of Waze, because the way it works is that people report where traffic cameras are. You can report where an accident is. You can report how fast people are driving down a certain highway. Waze is excellent because it's constantly connecting other cars and other drivers together in real time. So you know where a police officer is, where the traffic cameras are, there's a pothole on the road, all the things. This is all relying on other users. It's all crowd-based information. Very, very, very great. I mean, it's advanced for its time. Now, I believe that this type of technology, right, we rely on it using our cell phones. The difference is that this technology will be a part of our V2V. It's only going to become much more advanced, and we'll have real-time tracking and statistics that will help us get through our daily routines that are driving easier than ever.
Thank you, Katie. All right, so next up on the list is assisted cruise control. How many on the panel are familiar with that? Dr. Gunderson? Okay.
It's interesting you should mention that, because within the agricultural industry, we've had cruise control since 2002 in our tractors. In fact, one of the observations I make to our students, about half of whom are too young to remember or to know, is that there is more computer technology manufactured in the tractor cabs in 2015 than was deployed to fly the first flight on the backside of the moon. Now, admittedly, we're 4 decades away. But for our young students, there's no notion of what that life was like. But I remember it vividly because I had just returned from 5 years in the Australian protectorate of Papua New Guinea. And the notion that men, should be flying around the backside of the moon eventually was leagues away from the students I was teaching there, who would show up on the first day of class with spears in their hands. The world has changed dramatically. So indeed, it's here, and it's a part of the working life of a number of us who are involved day to day.
Thank you, Dr. Gunderson. So basically, in 2016 as well, assisted cruise control will allow you to take your hands off the wheel when you're going down the interstate. You have to be moving, I think it's either 60 or 65 miles an hour. You push your cruise control, and if you have the new Mercedes, I don't think you can go to sleep, but you can certainly enjoy the ride a little bit more. So another baby step towards autonomous vehicles happening in 2016, and that's, what, 7 months away? When's the 2016 vehicles normally come out? They come out pretty shortly, don't they? August or September, okay. So we're talking probably 4 months away that you're gonna start being able to buy this technology in your new cars. Next up on the list is crash avoidance. Mr. Dave, are you familiar with that at all?
I was thinking about, autonomous vehicle and what it could mean in a difference in my life because I drive a lot. And I was also thinking about up here where we have whiteouts, where we have blizzards, and we're on the road, and it's scary. I think we've all been there. We don't know what's in front of us, right? If there's a vehicle that's got pulled over or it's out of disabled, and we don't see it until we come on top of it, right? Or the snow plows that are blowing that snow. So, the crash avoidance part of these cars is going to be something that, I think we're all going to embrace and going, wow, this is really cool stuff. I know that, back to the cruise control and kind of turning things over. I don't know how many of you guys have had issues with your cruise control, but you get so spoiled when you set it and then you just, go. When it doesn't work, man, you're going, man, this is a pain in the butt. I have to accelerate back and forth and gas mileage and everything that comes with it. But, I think there's going to be so many opportunities to avoid crashes because of that technology that's going to be introduced in the cars. I'm just wondering too if some of that is going to be able to be retrofitted into existing cars, or if it's going to be the new technology built in, obviously, into the vehicles themselves. And I'm sure that, we already know that we've got phone capabilities in cars right now, because the issues of texting and driving, and now you can be able to talk to your car and communicate. So it's there, and it's going to continue to improve.
Yeah, I think there will be some adaptation kits for vehicles. I think Delphi is actually one that's working on that right now. But I don't see that coming in the near future. I mean, you're not going to be able to take a 1996 vehicle, for example, and probably adapt it. It's going to have to be a newer model that doesn't have autonomous features. But there certainly will be that going on out there. So again, crash avoidance. Does anybody in the audience now have a vehicle that has crash avoidance built into it? The driver. I guess you're right. So there are some vehicles out right now that actually have crash avoidance technology built into them, not us. So and it is kind of cool, and that will be another way as you're buying vehicles in the future that they get us to this point of getting used to autonomous vehicles. Dave, by the way, I rented a car recently, and as hard as this is to believe, I don't know if I just thought cruise control was standard on everything nowadays. I actually got a car that didn't have cruise control in it, and I drove about 100 miles, and I actually went and found the car rental place and said, I can't drive this car. I'm so used to having cruise control on long trips that you're right, it's kind of a pain when you don't have it now. And I can't imagine, I mean, we used to drive them all the time without that, so that's an interesting point. Parking lot, Dr. Gunderson, yes.
I was only going to comment on the retrofitting side, that offers excellent opportunity on the economic development arena. We already have in Fargo 2 firms, Reinhardt Incorporated and a second firm, who are well along on the agricultural side in developing and deploying the technology for crash and avoidance. In the one case for UAV technology use, and in the other case for farm tractor and farm truck use. Now, with relatively little adaptation, that can move into the commercial market. And I would further add that in our own program, we will be deploying one of the first autonomous lawnmowers in the world this summer. Now, there is some technology out there. John Deere has been toying with it. Toro has had a program for a while. We won't do the whole works. We can't do the sonography visioning out in front. But in terms of using global positioning systems, we will have our entire acreage around our classroom area mowed all summer long with an autonomous mower.
I can borrow that, right?
Possibly.
I have another test plot here in Mandan.
All right.
I'd be happy for you to
But
use
that's
that
all
also.
retrofit.
That's cool stuff.
We pull the steering wheel off of that mower, and we simply retrofit an entire automated steering system to it.
So you're not putting like an invisible fence around the yard? Like
No, that's the next step. That takes
Okay.
the sonographic imaging, and that's more complex. But the basic stuff will work.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So next up then is the parking lot valet service. Katie, are you familiar with this? I think Dr. Gunderson is. Kind of, yes. Using your tablet or your phone. Okay. Yep.
Okay, I think he's talking about features like what Tesla has. Tesla's Model S has a smartphone app that basically you can have the car drive for you and pull up just like a valet, and also park into a space for you. So a lot of these great things are just constantly being upgraded. And what's really neat about cars like Tesla's cars is that when these new features come out, it's just an upgrade on the app, and then all of a sudden you can do more neat and more autonomous type of things using the app, and that's what we're seeing in the future. It's all about getting the initial hardware and then having lots of software upgrades. It's I call this upgradia. It's a trend that basically we want to be able to keep things and not have to keep on buying new things, and just have the ability to continuously update whatever we have for the long term.
Autonomous self-parking is a fascinating idea, and I reflect back to the world that I once occupied full-time. If I'm a patient in a medical care facility, that's a wonderful opportunity for development. And in fact, we have major centers, the University of Iowa, for instance, where I'm at a good bit of the time, because I have an academic appointment there, is currently erecting a new parking garage, 9 stories, to match a new pediatric facility that is being erected. That facility is being built to accommodate the TELSA technology as it unfolds. And, forward thinking in terms of where might technology like this be first deployed in a way that really makes a difference on the customer service side. And that's a part of it.
I just need to tell a kind of a funny story. This happened probably about 20 years ago when me and my wife were visiting some friends of ours in Chicago. And we went downtown and went to this restaurant. I remember it's called Ed DeBibiak's. It's kind of a 50s theme. And it took us forever to find a parking spot, and we had to walk a couple miles. So we finally got there. And there was this other couple coming in at the same time. And this young man, dressed really nice, came up and he says, "Can I park your car? We have valet parking." And I looked at Stephen going, "Oh, these guys got valet parking. Why didn't we take advantage of this? And he said, I didn't know they had valet parking. Well, anyway, we had a nice meal and everything, and we happened to finish at the same time this other couple did. We came walking out with them, and, and we said, hey, how was the meal? Everything's fine, stuff like that. And he was looking around, and he says, I wonder where that valet parking attendant is. And finally, he went back inside and came back out, and he says, I just found out they don't have valet parking here. So, maybe this will take care of the situation. You can just do it yourself, right?
All right, so the advantages, and this is actually coming out right now. The Tesla model obviously is having this, but how it works basically is if you go to a shopping mall or a medical facility or whatever, you just basically pull your iPhone out or your Droid, and if you have the app for the vehicle, and you tell it to go park itself. And when you come back out of the shopping mall, it'll come back and get you at the door. So these are technologies again, and because it's on private property, they're allowed to do this type of thing right now. So that's kind of exciting about that as well. The other thing that I find interesting is that with valet service or self-parking cars like this is that there are places that I know the car will fit that I would never attempt to manually try to park my car. I mean, I'm sure you think about this. I mean, and I've had this happen plenty of times too when I park in a shopping mall and I come back out and I'm like, how do these idiots, why do they park so close to the car? I mean, I had wide open before I come back out. I can't even get into my car anymore, right? Well, with the valet service, you just turn it on from your Droid or your iPhone and it'll back the car out so that you can get into your car. So these are things that, again, another baby step towards autonomous vehicles that'll be coming out very shortly. Speaking of that, I don't know, now, are you familiar with what Tesla's doing this summer? Okay, as far as the upgrade to autonomous driving?
Okay, so yes, Tesla announced that Tesla already has the ability to have it all autonomous.
They just didn't let anybody know till recently. So you bought a car not knowing you even had this feature, so go ahead.
Exactly what he said. So basically Tesla already had all this built into the cars. It's just that it just had to be turned on. And of course, as we were saying with legislation, it's an issue. Legislation's what's holding back a lot of this autonomous technology from being accessed and used. But Tesla said that they will be rolling out semi-autonomous features, as we just discussed before with the parking and the valet service.
Yeah, and basically what's going to happen, there's some type of firmware upgrade that's going to happen over the summer. So if you own a couple of models of Tesla, they're just going to turn the features on. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future if Ford or Chrysler or Chevrolet do the same thing when you buy a car and then 3 years later they say, oh, by the way, we're going to turn the autonomous part on now. So you never know what's going to happen there. Now this is the Inspire truck that Katie was just talking about. This is put out by Daimler. This actually was test driven last week in Nevada. I think, did anybody follow that at all? Dr. Gunderson, did you? Okay, I'm going to turn the mic. Go ahead and grab the mic there. Why don't you talk a little bit about it? Oh, okay. So anyway, it was basically the first test of a truck in the United States. Mercedes, Volvo. If you go to YouTube and just type in autonomous truck, you'll find some videos that are out there now that have been done in Europe that is absolutely astounding. In fact, there's one in real traffic situations, and they actually have the driver of the truck. It's basically an office. He swings this chair 90 degrees away from the wheel, and he's working on his computer. He's booking another job while he's doing there, all while the truck is going down. There's an ambulance that goes rolling by, and as this ambulance comes up to him, the truck pulls off to the side by itself. It doesn't totally stop, but it stays with the other traffic as it slows down and moves over. It's absolutely amazing. And Europe, of course, they're a little more, I won't say they're more progressive. They just don't have the issues of moving some of this technology forward. However, and I'm going to quote Katie on this, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes if they're a leader, they can kind of shake out the bugs, so to speak, of the technology, and then we can embrace and move forward from that. So, all right, I think that's it for autonomous vehicles, and I'm just going to open up to questions real quick before we move into UAVs. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for anybody on the panel?
Yeah, I actually have 3 questions, if I could give all 3 of them. The first one is, you talk about all the positives. Are there any negatives?
I think there's always negative sides to any kind of technology. As Marlo was saying before, that there's a lot of people who just simply don't trust or believe in autonomous vehicle technology. And there's a lot of people talking about that. Even with the Google car, there's negative sides to anything. People are looking at Google recently announced that they had 11 minor accidents in the last 6 years of the Google car, the autonomous Google car. And while some people could look at that and be very, negative about it, and then there's also people, who are more optimistic saying, okay, they're very, very minor accidents, compared to how many horrible accidents happen with real human drivers. So it's all about how you look at it, really. There's always going to be negative sides to any technology, and there's also going to be people who are very skeptical as well.
The answer is yes, there are negatives. In the agriculture environment, there are 3. The first is that what we see as these technologies move onto farms and ranches, there's a natural inclination to lengthen the workday because the operator perceives they still need to be there, even if they're not per se in the tractor cab, or they're not doing a lot in the tractor cab or the truck cab, whatever it is. So we see a lot of predilection or incentivization to lengthen the workday. Within agricultural environments, we know, we've done this research repeatedly, there's a dose-response relationship between disease and injury in the agricultural workplace, and it translates this way. The longer you work in that environment, the more likely you are going to be injured or have some other recurrent health condition. That's just a given. We know that. That being said, there are 2 other issues. The second one is related to the first one, and that is the incidence of back and repetitive motion injury that operators experience when they're using this technology typically increases. So clearly the manufacturers of these devices, as well as their designers, in terms of cab ergonomics, the management of the functions that are in front and to the sides of the operator, that's no small matter. That's a huge deal, particularly if you're going to have long operational times in that technology. So those are the 3 things that we see.
I think one other issue, and we kind of addressed that a little bit this year when we were up at the Capitol, because the state has been looking at, regulations. Where are they going to be at? Because this is all new territory for them. And, and then, you talk about, different states, and is every state going to allow autonomous vehicles? And how do you work around that? And then, on the federal level, them getting involved. So I think you have a lot of those issues. And then, even across border, what's Canada going to do? And they're going to allow that to vehicles to travel, but when they get to the United States, can't. So I think that, there's work to be done on the legislative side of things for regulations. So, a lot of states are looking at that. North Dakota is looking at it right now and doing some preliminary study of what do we have to do to change that environment.
Okay, then I'm going to give my other 2 questions kind of together. Okay. Let me throw my other 2 questions out too, because they're somewhat related. One is safety features for malfunctions. I understand it's probably safer than what we have now, but I grew up my whole life around mechanical things, and they don't always work exactly how they're designed. So what happens when it doesn't work and what safety features do they have in there? The other one is cost. I mean, I understand that it may be fairly low cost up front to make a vehicle like this, but what I've experienced with vehicles is even today's vehicles, there's so many sensors on them, and a lot of times the particular function works fine, but the sensor went out. I mean, and I think anti-lock brakes is a great example. But then it costs $400 to $600 to put the sensor in. So I worry about large number of sensors and things in a vehicle that it probably doesn't cost much to put it in, but it costs a lot if you have a problem.
All great points. The safety feature, first of all, the cars that I've been in, I've actually driven in 5 autonomous vehicles, been behind the wheel on 2 of them. At any time, if you grab the wheel, it disengages the autonomous feature. So if you're, and in fact, you know, one of the stories that I have about that is that I didn't agree with the following distance of the car. So I was always, the first time I was in the car and I was behind the wheel, I was always grabbing the wheel and hitting the brakes because I thought we were traveling too close. You know, I've always been a firm believer of giving a little extra space. Well, the autonomous vehicle reacts dramatically quicker than I ever would, and of course, I have other stories that I can illustrate that with. But so it actually was a problem for me right away because I was always grabbing the steering wheel and hitting the brake and it would turn off the autonomous feature, and that will always be in place. So if you disagree with what the car is doing and you're behind the wheel, and in fact, as we move forward, and this is just my opinion, but I think it's shared by many people in the industry, as long as you have somebody behind the wheel, this technology will move forward, and there's not a lot of laws that will be needed to be passed or regulation in place to stop that from happening. Think about when the industry introduced cruise control, for example. They didn't go get legislative approval for that. I think that'll be the same there. Where that happens is when we move to the back seat and the car is driving us. Then there's some laws that have to be passed. But so there's some of those that are in there. The sensors thing, you're absolutely right. You know, the thing I could probably counter that with would be that we'll have substantially less accidents. So maybe the cost of the additional sensors would be dramatically offset because we're having a lot fewer accidents. So I'm hoping that's the case. But I agree with you. There's going to be cost. Early integrators to this technology are gonna have a much greater cost as we move forward. But that's probably what we're gonna do. One of the things too is gonna be that you know, cars are probably gonna get lighter as we move forward because they won't, because we're in less crashes. Maybe we don't need to have all these other safety things. You know, the width of the bumper to the cab, for example, might be able to be reduced and things like that. I'm just kind of throwing that stuff out. So anybody else on that?
If we use the agricultural experience as something of a precursor to this whole arena, we make 2 observations. First of all, the initial purchase is one matter. The replacement when the technology no longer functions correctly is quite another. That remains an issue in the agricultural arena. But I will also add that one of the things that agricultural equipment manufacturers have discovered, it runs along the following lines. Agricultural producers, particularly males, have an unbelievable romance with the welder. And if there's any way in which they can stick 2 pieces of metal together and fuse it, by gum, they'll do it. So, for example, in this state, we have Melrose Bobcat manufacturing skid steers, and we have the vast majority of the Case IH skid steers sold domestically across North America, manufactured and assembled in Fargo at their plant. One of the things they have done from an engineering perspective is deliberately engineer out that predilection of agricultural producers to attach a welding rod to the skid steers. And here's how they did it. They placed virtually all of the controls for that equipment in the upper cab structure. So the moment a producer tries to take that cab off, they've essentially disabled that entire piece of equipment. And normally speaking, in order to weld on it, you've got to take the cab off because you want to disable virtually any possibility of transmitting electronic signals or arcing into the electrical systems embedded in that technology. In fact, one of the things that the user manuals make very clear to producers, you touch this equipment with an arc welder of any sort, and you've automatically disabled the guarantees and the warranties. So that's another interesting perspective on all of that.
All right. And Larry, you're going to be first up after lunch. So just remember your question, okay? One last thing on the safety issue that I get a lot of questions about is the ability of people to hack into your car. And I'm sure many of you have concerns with that. And I think it is an ongoing concern. And I would imagine it's probably going to be possible, you know, and then maybe the ability of somebody to take over your car. I always think about airplanes when it comes to the ability of other people to maybe, and this is one of the, I think a lot about, you know, fleet management in the future and the ability to maybe remotely control vehicles. So let's say you have a trucking firm, maybe you have one person operating 5 or 10 rigs from your office. So I think about that a lot, and I think we're going to be moving in that direction in the future. And I have a lot of people that say, well, if you have that vision with this, what stops other people from taking it over? And there's probably a little bit of security risk with that, but I don't know if there's anybody in this room that maybe on 9/11 would have really wished that we would have had somebody that could have taken over those planes, you know, from the ground. And, you know, there's a lot of incidents with aircraft that, you know, if they deviate from a flight plan or whatever, that if you had the ability to take over that flight from the ground, that many countless lives would have been saved, and, you know, many incidents. So I think that these technologies, you know, even though there's some bad that can happen with them, there's equally and probably greater good. So that's the way you kind of have to approach some of this stuff. So with that, yes.
I got an interesting quote that will leave with you, and it comes from Peter Cheney, who is award-winning writer for Drive section of the Globe and Mail newspaper. He quoted, "After a lifetime of driving, repairing, and studying automobiles, I have come to an unavoidable conclusion. We are the weakest link in a car. As car components go, human beings are deeply substandard. We have imperfect perception, and we are ruled by emotion, and we vary wildly in quality as well."